my paint by number peeps. Okay, so today we're doing something a little bit different, and I'm gonna need you to raise your hand if you are super confused about all of this talk about flow aid and extenders and floating medium, and oh my goodness, there's so many things that I can add to my paint to make it better for my paint by numbers, and I'm so confused. What do I need to use and why? So today we're gonna experiment. All right, so what I have in front of me is kind of semi-textured. It's not quite as textured as a regular canvas. And the reason I'm gonna try this with a black piece of cardstock is because I want to show the difference in opacity for a paint. So these are additives, but an additive is something you add to your paint. So if you're confused, then consider it that way. So what I have in front of me is I have diluted flow aid. This is just a little jar, and I have put a drop of flow aid for every 20 drops of water, and I have a little dropper in here, and this is how I use my diluted flow aid. So I'm gonna show you a paint. I'm just gonna pick one of these old paints I have from a previous set, and I'm gonna paint a swatch. So I've got a little mixing palette here. So I'm gonna put a little bit of this paint in each of these wells before I add anything to it. And what I'm gonna use this little bit on my brush for, I've got a chisel brush just so I can kind of make a nice stroke for you to be able to see. This one will be water, and I'm gonna take a Sharpie and write down which is which. But for right now, let's take the excess paint off our little stick, and we're gonna make a swatch. Now I want you to watch how the paint swatches right out of the container. That's with nothing added to it. Now I can wipe this off after I'm done with an alcohol wipe. So for this one, we're gonna add a little bit of water to our brush. And I barely had any on there. And let's see what happens. Okay, well the first thing you notice is that we're not getting the same amount of opacity, but it is helping our brush move a little easier. When this dries, it's not gonna be as opaque as that one because we used water. So let me put a little more paint, because usually if you add a drop or two of diluted medium, you're adding it to a whole pot, not just one little blip of it. So let's make sure this is an accurate test. Okay, so diluted flow aid. I'm gonna mix it up. Okay, so diluted flow aid is a lot less opaque, but it looks like it might be a little more opaque than just water. Okay, next let's add a drop of just plain flow aid. And you see how it moves? Oh my gosh, it's so much smoother and creamier than the other ones, and it's given us a lot more opacity than these two. So people ask me all the time, aren't you supposed to dilute flow aid? And I'm like, you know, that's what it says, but I have more luck with it this way than I do with it these two ways. Now, I want you to also notice, one drop of flow aid for that little tiny bit that I used is going to make it more transparent than it would be if it was right out of the container like this. But it's moving so much more fluidly than it was here. It's not dragging. And one drop is a lot for that little tiny bit of paint I had. Let's go in with our extender. So an extender is supposed to literally extend the paint time, the drying time. And it doesn't really want to mix very well. I'm getting a very weird consistency here. That's really strange. It got all up on the ferrule, and it's not really wanting to move here. Let me try a little bit more paint. Maybe just put a little bit out. Maybe it's just drying up too fast. try to mix it up a little bit better. All right, now let's test it again. Now it's making it flow very nicely, great consistency, nice opacity. And this is the extender. Now this is made by FolkArt, but there is a Liquitex slow dry extender that I'm going to put in the bottom. This has got the same opacity as what we have here, and it just moves a little nicer. Okay, so next we're testing floating medium. Now I'm just gonna put a drop. This is a very thick type of additive, but this is made for blending colors together, and usually you would take it on a palette like this, blend the colors, make them mix better together, but we're gonna try it like this today just for demonstration purposes. Now it's almost a gel consistency instead of a liquid effect. You'll notice it makes it real smooth to paint. All right, so extender and floating medium. They're kind of work the same way, but they're different consistencies completely. And that floating medium literally just makes you feel like you're just floating. We're gonna use a tiny, tiny bit, I'm not even sure how to get a tiny bit out of this modeling paste. Now the purpose of this modeling paste, from what I understand, is to make your paints more opaque. I'm making a mess. Okay. And that's probably way more of that modeling paste than I need. So I'm actually gonna take what is on the brush, just this little bit that's on the brush, and mix it here. Let's see how much thicker it is. It doesn't thin it out at all. Now let's do our swatch for the modeling paste right here. Now, one thing I'm noticing right off the bat are strokes. I can see the brush strokes, and it's very opaque. It's a very smooth finish, but the problem is it feels like it just came straight out of the jar. It feels like it wouldn't be as easy to work with, but it's definitely gonna add some texture. So let's add a little texture for fun here. Let's see if we can add some texture. So when this dries, it'll be all textury. But I have tried all of these, and I still tend to go back to the Flow Aid, this one here, almost all the time. So what I wanna do to show you why, I'm gonna do one more little experiment, and I'm gonna try a different color and just drop the Flow Aid right into the container. First, let's just go ahead and use a little bit straight out of the container. Okay, now this is, actually 2 or 3 coats, more than we would normally do. So that is the normal opacity of this particular color. Let's add a drop, as if I'm painting. I'm gonna add 2 drops of Flow Aid. So I'm going to mix up the Flow Aid, the 2 little drops. I'm gonna make sure I'm blending from the bottom and mixing from the bottom. Now this is an old paint. It's about a year-old paint. It's been sitting in this little pot. So it might even be that I need more than that, but okay, I'm gonna get a little bit more. It's better to add 1 drop at a time than it is to dump a whole bunch in here and then have it too liquidy. All right, so I'm not gonna add another drop yet. Okay, now let's try it with just Flow Aid. And you see how easy, it doesn't pull. It doesn't, it just goes on like butter. I don't know what it is about the Flow Aid, but it's just such a creamy, easy, just smooth consistency. And I'm not trying to do multiple coats. I'm just trying to show you how it just glides when it's got Flow Aid in it. The opacity is better here than it was just straight out of the pot, even with the 2 or 3 drops of Flow Aid. So that is why I use Flow Aid 99% of the time over the other options. So while we're doing this, we're gonna do another test. We're gonna pick a different color and we're going to test it. This is very thick. It is thickened up a lot. over the time. And yeah, it's barely even moving. Okay, I'm doing a bunch of strokes over the top just to try to get it. It's so dry. All right, so we've got this paint. It's a little thick. What am I gonna do? I can't use it like this. What are my options? So let's try, instead of Flow Aid this time, we're gonna add the Extender or the Slow Dry by Liquitex, whichever brand you end up with. I'm gonna add 2 drops and stir it up. I just don't ever wanna add more than I need to begin with. Let's see, now see how chunky it gets? Because it's so dried out. So let's see if that extender helps. Right now it's not doing anything. All right, so if the extender's not working, let's add a little bit more. I'll add a drop or 2 more. 3 drops more, because it's super thick. We're gonna mix that up and we're gonna see what it's doing. Just kind of moving around in there like one big chunk. All right, so now at this point, if I was painting and this was happening to my paint, I would take my Flow Aid, 2 drops of it, and try to mix it up. And I'm already seeing a little difference in the consistency. Still a little choppy, still a little chunky. So in this case, let's see if we add a little diluted Flow Aid, which one is going to make it the best consistency. All right, it's kind of getting to where I want it to be, but it still looks a little chunky. All right, but we're gonna try it this way. So let's test it. Now we added all that stuff, okay? What is our opacity like now? Did we mess it up? Look how creamy and smooth it is. Look how much smoother that applies. Look at the opacity. So even though we added more liquid, it's thicker and it's covering better and it's going on smoother than it did before we added anything to it. So that to me is just visual proof of why these additives can be so helpful. If one doesn't work, I try a different one. If that one doesn't work, I try a combination of ones. I just do whatever it takes to make the paint do what I need it to do. And that is what I need it to do. That, I can see the black through it. This one is perfect. The opacity is wonderful. It was creamier, even though it looked kind of chunky still in my pot. It looks so much better here. So finally, lastly, we're gonna take one of these pots. I'm gonna try this number 23. I know it's super light looking, but I don't know. Let's try it straight out of the pot. Okay, you see how I can get the first stroke, and then by the time I come over here, it's already skipping and it's not smooth. So that's the opacity of it straight out of the pot. Now we're gonna just add just straight in here a big blob of the floating medium. And we're just gonna stir it up like we did for the other ones. And let's see what this does by itself to this consistency. All right, so it's already getting creamier. It's still kind of thick, still very thick. I'm gonna try it this way. And you see how much smoother it applies? Okay, now. And it's got more opacity than it did here. So one more thing I wanna do, I'm gonna add Flow Aid. By itself, out of the bottle, I'm adding 3 drops. Oop. I keep getting it on my paper. Okay, that's why I never work over my canvas when I'm adding Flow Aid, because inevitably a little drop will escape somewhere on the canvas. Okay, let's get our little stick here to stir. Now, I'm not sitting here and telling you I recommend you mix up a bunch of stuff into your paint, but if one thing doesn't work, I will tell you to try something else. Now, do you see the creaminess of this paint after I added 2 or 3 drops of straight Flow Aid? Yes. Now let's see how it looks as far as opacity and how well it paints. Ooh, it's creamy. Ooh, it's so buttery. It is so much better consistency. Now, is it as opaque? It looks better to me. Maybe I just got more there than I thought I did here, but it's much more opaque. I hope that explained why I use all of these additives in my paintings and why I tell you, oh, well, this is what I'm using now and this is what I'm using. I'm not trying to sell you on anything you do not need. Please trust me on that. I realize that I do have affiliate links, but that's only so I can afford to buy paint by numbers and these products that I demonstrate to you. That's the only reason I do it. I don't make any money. I don't profit anything because I turn around and put the money that I make back into buying something else so I can review it for you. Now, I do want you to look. The light modeling paste is dry. It dried with that texture. I don't know if you can see that texture with this lighting, but it definitely gave some impasto, which just means texture. And here you can see from the paint pot, if you've got a really creamy consistency, you're gonna get your best opacity, but you're not gonna get your best smoothness. These over here are gonna help you with opacity and smoothness. So this one was just straight Flow Aid without being diluted. This one is the extender. This one is the floating medium. And then here I have the light modeling paste, which you see that adding that white is what made that such great coverage, so much great opacity. And down here, our test shows that by itself, our paint wasn't as opaque as it is when we added a little extender and a little undiluted Flow Aid and a little diluted Flow Aid. And you have much better opacity here, even after adding all of that, than you did just coming out of the pot. And then finally, we have just out of the pot, straight out of the pot, just adding the floating medium. And here we've added a drop of floating medium and 3 drops of Flow Aid. And we have such great opacity, smoothness. Now I didn't get my stroke marks out of that. I didn't try to, but you can just see, I guess, that the proof is here why I use Flow Aid. If you had to pick one of all of these to start with, get the Flow Aid and get a larger bottle. This one is a 4-ounce bottle, but an 8-ounce would be nice too because you will use it if you continue to paint. But I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys, kind of see what I was trying to accomplish here today. And I'll be back with another video one day very soon, I'm sure, because I'm trying to record them like crazy in case we get evicted and I have to move out again. So, my life, it's hit or miss. It's up in the air. It's in limbo. Anyway, you guys, thanks as always for being here with me. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified of future videos and you don't want to miss anything, I promise. All right, have a wonderful day. Stay safe, everybody.